He had been told she was plain, not ugly, not difficult to look at. Just plain enough that a man like Caleb Mercer would never have to worry about her stirring trouble inside him. That was the arrangement, a practical marriage, a quiet woman for a quiet ranch. No complications. The letter had come from a preacher, 2 states east, a widow's daughter, 24, literate, hardworking, capable of sewing, cooking, tending livestock. No surviving family worth mentioning. The preacher described her as modest in appearance and reserved in nature. Caleb had read that line 3 times. Modest in appearance, it should not have mattered, but it did. Because beauty complicated men. He had seen it happen in mining towns, saloons, church gatherings. Men lost judgment around beautiful women. They gambled harder, drank more, fought quicker, wanted things they could not keep. And Caleb Mercer had spent the better part of 8 years teaching himself not to want anything at all. So when the stagecoach finally rolled into Black Hollow near sundown, he stood outside the general store with one hand resting against the hitching rail and expected relief. Instead, the first sight of her made something dangerous move through him, so suddenly that he nearly stepped backward. She descended slowly from the coach, one gloved hand gripping the doorframe. Dust drifted around her boots. The entire street seemed to pause without meaning to. Not because she was dressed richly, she was not. Not because she carried herself proudly, she did not. It was something quieter than that. Stillness. A composed kind of grace that did not belong in a town like Black Hollow. Her dark coat was travel-worn. Her hat shadowed most of her face. But when she lifted her eyes toward the street, Caleb felt the strange and immediate instinct to look away first. God help him. The preacher had either lied or never truly looked at her. She spotted him before he moved. "You're Mr. Mercer." Her voice was calm, soft but not timid. Caleb nodded once. "That's right." She studied him only briefly, as if measuring whether he matched the version she had prepared herself for. Apparently, he did. She stepped down from the coach fully then, and the fading light caught her face beneath the brim of her hat. Not delicate, not fragile, but quietly arresting in a way that unsettled him immediately. A scar, faint and pale, traced near the edge of her jaw before disappearing beneath her collar. Her eyes held an unusual steadiness, as though she had already survived things she did not intend to discuss. She was beautiful, not the loud sort of beauty that demanded attention, worse, the kind that lingered, the kind a lonely man carried home with him whether he wished to or not. Caleb felt irritation rise sharp and immediate, at himself, at the preacher, at the long ache of solitude he had nearly managed to bury these past years. "You travel all right?" he asked. "Yes." "That your only bag?" "Yes." Short answers. He appreciated that. Still, something about her unsettled the careful balance of silence he had built around his life. The stagecoach driver unloaded a single worn trunk. Caleb grabbed it before she could reach for the handle. "I can carry it." "I know." The words came rougher than intended. A flicker crossed her face then. Not offense exactly, recognition, as if she understood hard men better than he expected. They walked toward his wagon beneath the gaze of half the town. Black Hollow was small enough that nothing new arrived unnoticed, and a beautiful woman arriving beside the most withdrawn rancher in the territory was enough to stop conversations entirely. Caleb ignored them, mostly because he feared if he looked at anyone, they would somehow see what had already gone wrong inside him. The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour. The sun disappeared slowly behind the hills, while the wagon wheels groaned across uneven ground. She sat beside him quietly, gloved hands folded in her lap. Most women would have tried conversation by then. She did not. That should have eased him. Instead, the silence made him aware of everything. The faint scent of lavender beneath road dust. The way she watched the horizon carefully, like someone accustomed to leaving places behind. The exhaustion hidden beneath her composure. "You can still change your mind," Caleb said finally. She turned slightly. "About marrying you?" "Yes." "You wish me to." "No." Too quick. His jaw tightened. "I'm saying you're not trapped here." She looked ahead again. "Neither are you." The answer settled between them with unsettling weight. Caleb had expected awkwardness. What he had not expected was the strange sense that this woman saw more than she should. The ranch house appeared at the edge of dusk, small, weathered, functional, no flowers, no curtains, no warmth beyond necessity. He saw her taking it in quietly. "It's not much," he said. "It's enough." Again, that calm voice. No disappointment, no false cheerfulness either. Just truth that somehow made it worse. Inside, he lit the oil lamps while she removed her gloves carefully. The house suddenly felt too small for another person, too intimate. He had lived alone so long that even the sound of another pair of footsteps unsettled him. "There's stew," he said, "if you're hungry." "I am." He served bowls in silence. She ate slowly, politely, without complaint. Most people filled silence because they feared it. She seemed comfortable inside it. That alone made him wary. After supper, she stood near the small window overlooking the dark pasture. "Mr. Mercer." "Caleb's fine." A pause, then softly. "Caleb." The sound of his name in her voice affected him more than it should have, dangerously more. "You said in your letters you lost your wife." The words caught him off guard. "Yes." "How long ago?" 8 years. She nodded once. No pity, no pressing questions, only quiet acknowledgement. It should not have mattered, but it did. Because most people looked at him afterward with sympathy or discomfort, as though grief were something contagious. She simply accepted it as fact, already living beside him. "You lost someone too," he said before he could stop himself. Her fingers stilled against the windowsill. "Yes." The room grew quieter somehow. He waited. She did not continue, and Caleb realized two things at once. First, she had secrets. Second, he wanted very badly to know them. That realization unsettled him more than beauty ever could. The marriage took place the next morning in the church near town. No celebration, no guests besides the preacher and old Martha Bell from the boarding house serving as witness. Simple suited Caleb fine. Yet standing beside her beneath the church light felt strangely unreal. When she spoke her vows, her voice never trembled. When Caleb answered, his own sounded rougher than usual. The preacher smiled afterward. "You'll build a good life together." Caleb almost looked away. Because the truth was, he did not know how to build a life with anyone anymore. He only knew how to survive one. The ride home passed mostly in silence again, but this silence had changed. She was now his wife. The fact settled strangely across his thoughts. His wife. The words felt too intimate for two people who still barely knew one another. That night he prepared to sleep in the barn. "You don't have to," she said quietly from the bedroom doorway. He avoided looking directly at her. "Yes, I do." "Because you dislike me?" "No." The answer came low and immediate. She watched him carefully. "Then why?" Because every instinct in him already noticed her too much. Because he had spent years mastering restraint, and one look from her threatened to unravel it. Because desire frightened him more than loneliness ever had. But he only said, "You've had enough change for 1 week." For the first time, something softer touched her expression. Understanding. "Good night, Caleb." He nodded once and stepped into the cold night air before he could say something reckless. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and horses. Safe things, predictable things. Yet sleep refused to come. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw hers. Still, quiet, watchful, and beneath all that composure, lonely. That was the part that stayed with him longest. Not her beauty, the loneliness. As though she carried silence inside herself the same way he did. The following weeks settled into routine carefully. She rose early, cooked without complaint, mended clothes, learned the rhythms of the ranch quickly. But she never tried forcing herself into spaces Caleb kept guarded, and somehow that restraint drew him toward her more each day. He began noticing things unintentionally. The way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear while reading. The quiet hum she made while kneading bread. How she paused sometimes at sunset as if remembering another life entirely. And gradually, against his better judgment, the house stopped feeling empty. That frightened him. One evening he returned from repairing fencing along the northern pasture, and found her sitting on the porch steps with one sleeve rolled carefully upward. Bruising darkened her forearm. Caleb stopped immediately. What happened? She lowered the sleeve too quickly. Nothing. His expression hardened. That's not nothing. Her gaze shifted away. I slipped carrying water. It was a lie, not dramatic, not obvious, but a lie nonetheless. Caleb recognized lies because he used them himself whenever someone came too close to old wounds. He crouched before her slowly. Who hurt you? The question lingered heavily between them. For the first time since arriving, genuine tension crossed her face. No one now. Now. The words settled cold inside him. He held her gaze a long moment before standing again. Something protective and dangerous moved quietly through his chest. Not anger alone, something deeper. That night he lay awake in the barn, staring into darkness, realizing with growing unease that he had begun thinking about her constantly. Not only whether she was settling well, not only whether she was safe, but smaller things, whether she laughed when alone, whether she slept peacefully, whether anyone had ever cared for her properly before. And worse than all of it, he had begun looking forward to coming home. The realization felt almost unbearable, because home had once been a thing he lost. He had buried his wife during a winter fever 8 years earlier, buried the child with her 2 days later. Afterwards, something inside him had gone silent for so long, he assumed it would remain that way forever. Until Eleanor. Even thinking her name softened something in him against his will. One afternoon, rain rolled across the valley, hard and sudden. Caleb returned soaked through and found her near the fire, reading one of the few books he owned. You read often? He asked while removing his coat. She closed the book gently. My father taught literature before he died. That surprised him. You grew up educated. Yes. Then why answer a mail-order marriage advertisement? The question slipped out before he could stop it. She became very still. For a moment he thought she might refuse to answer. Then quietly, because some places become impossible to stay. The fire crackled softly between them. Caleb watched her carefully. There it was again. Hidden pain, not performed, not exaggerated, simply carried. You running from someone? A pause. Yes. The honesty caught him off guard. Will they come looking? I don't know. Rain battered the roof harder. Caleb studied her face in the firelight. Fear was there beneath her calmness. Old fear, familiar fear. Something tightened slowly in his chest. If they do, he said quietly, they'll have to go through me first. Her eyes lifted toward his then, and for the first time since arriving, her composure cracked just slightly. Not with tears, something smaller, relief. It passed quickly, but Caleb saw it, and once he saw it, he could not stop thinking about it. Winter approached slowly across the territory. Days shortened. Nights grew colder. And somehow the distance between them narrowed without either acknowledging it directly. She began waiting supper for him even when he returned late. He repaired the loose step near the porch because he noticed her favoring one ankle. They spoke more now, not deeply, never fully, but enough to build familiarity. One night, while snow gathered outside the windows, Caleb found her asleep in the chair near the fire, a blanket half fallen from her lap. The sight stopped him completely. Soft firelight touched her face gently. For the first time since arriving, she looked unguarded, peaceful, and unbearably beautiful. Caleb stood there longer than he should have, then slowly bent and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. Her eyes opened faintly. For one suspended moment, neither moved. She looked up at him from inches away, still blurred by sleep. His hand remained lightly against the blanket near her collarbone. Too close, entirely too close. The room seemed to tighten around them, and suddenly Caleb understood with terrifying clarity that he wanted to kiss her. Not casually, not out of loneliness. He wanted it with the deep, aching certainty of a man who had denied himself tenderness for too many years. He stepped back immediately. Go to bed, he said roughly. Confusion flickered across her sleepy expression. Then understanding. That was the dangerous part. She understood too much. Yes, Caleb. He barely slept that night. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Caleb rode into town for supplies and noticed two unfamiliar men near the saloon. Well-dressed, Eastern, watching people too carefully. One of them approached him near the stable. "You Mercer?" "Yes." "We're looking for a woman." Every muscle in Caleb's body tightened instantly. The man continued. "Dark hair, about this tall, calls herself Eleanor Whitmore." Calls herself. The wording told him enough already. Caleb's face revealed nothing. "Never heard the name." The second man studied him. "You sure?" "Yes." A long silence followed. Then the first man smiled thinly. "If you do, tell her her husband's looking for her." Husband. Cold anger spread through Caleb slowly. He said nothing further and rode home before dusk. Eleanor looked up from the kitchen table the moment he entered. Something in his expression must have warned her, because the color drained from her face before he spoke. "They found you." Silence. Then she sat down very carefully, as though her legs might fail otherwise. Caleb removed his gloves slowly. "You want to tell me the truth now?" Her hands trembled once before stilling. "My husband was a wealthy man in St. Louis." Was. Caleb listened quietly. He liked beautiful things. Horses, watches, houses. A pause. Women. The words came flatly, practiced through pain long endured. "He hurt you." "Yes." The simple honesty of it struck harder than any dramatic confession could have. Caleb felt rage rise cold and immediate. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Her eyes lifted toward him then. "You've seen men like that before." Yes, he had. Men with money and charm and cruelty hidden carefully beneath both. He would apologize afterward, she continued softly, then buy gifts, then promise change. Her voice thinned slightly. One day he nearly killed a stable boy for speaking out of turn. Caleb's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. "So you ran." "Yes, and married a stranger." A faint sadness touched her mouth. "You seem safer than most strangers." The words settled heavily between them. Safer. No one had ever described Caleb Mercer that way before. He moved toward the window slowly, staring into the darkening pasture. "Those men said he's looking for you. He won't stop." Fear lingered beneath her composure now. Real fear. Caleb turned back toward her. "Did he ever force you?" Her eyes widened slightly. The silence itself answered him. Something dangerous went very still inside Caleb then. Not explosive anger. Worse. Controlled anger. The kind that made men capable of terrible things quietly. "You're not going back," he said. A long pause followed. Then softly, "I know." The certainty in her voice affected him more than he expected, because she trusted him, and Caleb was beginning to realize he would do nearly anything to keep that trust intact. The days afterward carried tension beneath every ordinary task. Caleb checked the property lines twice daily now, kept his rifle nearby, watched the hills carefully. Eleanor noticed everything without commenting. Yet something between them changed again after her confession. The distance had thinned. Secrets once hidden now lived openly between them. One evening she found him repairing tack in the barn. "You're angry," she said quietly. "Yes." "At him?" Caleb looked up. "At every man who ever made you afraid." The words left the barn silent. Eleanor stared at him as though uncertain what to do with such gentleness. He returned his attention to the leather straps before the moment deepened too far. But she remained there. "I don't think you realize," she said softly, "how unusual you are." Caleb gave a low, humorless breath. "You don't know enough men." "No." Her eyes held his steadily. "I know exactly enough." Something shifted painfully inside him then, because no woman had ever looked at him the way she just had. Not with admiration, not with safety. And suddenly the restraint he clung to felt thinner than ever. Winter settled fully by December. Snow covered the hills in pale silence. And inside the ranch house, warmth slowly replaced caution. Not entirely, but enough. She began smiling more now. Small, quiet smiles that appeared unexpectedly and disappeared just as fast. Once he caught himself waiting for them. Another time he found her laughing softly at one of his dry remarks and realized he would have ridden through a blizzard to hear that sound again. That frightened him most of all. One night a storm trapped them indoors completely. Wind rattled the windows hard enough to shake the walls. The fire burned low and golden. Eleanor sat mending one of his shirts while Caleb sharpened a knife nearby. Domestic silence. Simple. Dangerous. Because it felt too natural. "Why did you never remarry?" she asked quietly. Caleb's hand stilled. "No reason to." "That isn't true." He looked at her then. The firelight softened her features, but her gaze remained steady. "There are always reasons," she said. He stared at the blade in his hands. "When Anna died," he paused roughly. Something closed. Eleanor waited. "She was good," his voice lowered. "Kind. I buried her and my son in the same week." A faint muscle moved in his jaw. "After that, I stopped expecting much from life." Silence stretched softly between them. Then Eleanor set the shirt aside and crossed the room slowly, carefully, as though approaching something wounded. She knelt beside his chair, not touching him yet, just close. Caleb could feel warmth radiating from her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "and God help him." That nearly undid him entirely, because pity felt cold. But this felt like someone mourning beside him. His hand tightened around the knife handle once before he set it down. "You should keep your distance from me," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because I'm starting to forget how." Her breath caught softly. The room became unbearably still. He lifted his eyes toward hers, and there it was at last, not imagined, not one-sided. Want. Quiet and restrained and terrified. In both of them. Eleanor's voice dropped almost to nothing. "You're the first man I've never feared." The confession struck him harder than any touch could have. Caleb reached for her before thinking better of it. One rough hand settled gently against her face. She leaned into it immediately. Not seductively, trustingly. That nearly broke him. His thumb brushed lightly along the edge of her jaw near the faded scar. Did he do this too? Yes. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, she was watching him with an expression so open and vulnerable that restraint finally began slipping from his grasp. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their foreheads touched first, a breath shared. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. And when he finally kissed her, it felt less like hunger and more like surrender. Gentle, careful, a man touching something precious after years believing he no longer deserved tenderness. Eleanor's hand rose shakily against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat through his shirt. Fast. So was his. The kiss deepened only slightly before Caleb pulled back abruptly, breathing rougher now. Because desire had arrived suddenly and fiercely, frightening in its intensity. He stood immediately and stepped away. Eleanor looked startled. "Caleb, I need air." He left before she could answer. Snow lashed cold against his face outside, but it did little to steady him, because the truth had become unavoidable now. He loved her, not gradually, not safely, fully. And that terrified him more than loneliness ever had. The confrontation came 2 days later. Caleb spotted riders approaching near dusk. 3 men. One of them wore a black city coat despite the snow. Eleanor saw them from the window and went pale instantly. "Him," she whispered. Caleb stepped in front of her automatically. "Stay inside." Her fingers caught his sleeve suddenly. "Caleb, he's dangerous." "So am I." The words came calm and cold. He stepped onto the porch with rifle in hand as the riders approached. The man leading them dismounted smoothly. Handsome in the polished way cruel men often were. His eyes found Eleanor through the window immediately. "There you are." Caleb's voice remained level. "You should leave." The man smiled faintly. "That's my wife." "No," Caleb said quietly. "She's mine now." Something dark flickered across the stranger's face. "You have any idea who you're speaking to?" "No." Caleb adjusted his grip on the rifle. "And I don't care." Snow drifted sideways through the silence. The man's expression hardened. "She belongs with me." At that, Eleanor stepped onto the porch behind Caleb despite his earlier command. "No," she said clearly. "I never did." Her husband looked at her with cold disbelief. "You ungrateful little—" Caleb moved before the insult fully formed. The rifle barrel lifted slightly. Not dramatic, just enough. "You'll speak carefully," he said. Something in his voice must have warned them. Because the other riders shifted uneasily. Eleanor's husband laughed once, though uncertainty edged it now. "You willing to die for her?" Caleb did not hesitate. "Yes." The answer silenced everything, even Eleanor, because it was true, entirely true. Her husband studied him a long moment and finally understood something dangerous. This was not infatuation, not ownership, not pride. Caleb Mercer loved her enough to kill for her if necessary, and perhaps die too. The realization altered the balance completely. The man looked toward Eleanor again. "You'd choose this life?" She stepped closer to Caleb. "Yes." Simple, absolute. At last the man exhaled sharply through his nose. "You'll regret it." "Maybe," she said softly, "but not because I left you." Something final passed across his face then. Humiliation, perhaps. Or the realization that control once lost could not be reclaimed through force. At length he mounted his horse again. "This territory's too small for sentiment," he muttered. Then he rode away into the snow. The others followed. Caleb waited until they vanished fully beyond the hills before lowering the rifle. Only then did he feel Eleanor's trembling. He turned immediately. "You all right?" She nodded once. Then unexpectedly, she began crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quiet tears she seemed almost embarrassed by. Caleb stepped toward her instinctively, and the moment his arms wrapped around her, she held him with desperate strength. Years of fear leaving slowly. He understood that, so he simply held her tighter. The snow continued falling around them while dust settled softly across the ranch. And for the first time since she arrived, Eleanor no longer looked ready to flee. Later that night, they sat beside the fire together, close enough that her shoulder rested lightly against his. Neither spoke for a while. Then Caleb finally said, "I should have kissed you sooner." A surprised laugh escaped her quietly. "That doesn't sound like you." "No." His mouth curved faintly. "I suppose it doesn't." She studied him in the firelight. "You were afraid." "Yes." "Of me?" He looked at her then with such honesty it made her breath catch. "Of needing you." The room fell silent again, but this silence no longer felt lonely. Eleanor touched his rough hand carefully. "You do know something, Caleb." "What's that?" "You stopped looking lonely weeks ago." The words settled deeply inside him. Because she was right. Without realizing it, he had begun living again. Not surviving, living. The realization felt almost painful in its tenderness. He lifted her hand slowly and pressed a kiss against her knuckles. Small gesture. Quiet. Yet it carried more intimacy than any grand declaration could have. Spring arrived months later in slow green waves across the valley. Snow melted from the hills. The ranch softened with warmth again, and the house that once echoed with silence now carried life inside it. Real life. Eleanor planted flowers near the porch despite insisting she knew little about gardening. Caleb pretended irritation while secretly building planter boxes before sunrise so she would not strain her hands. At supper, they spoke more easily now, laughed sometimes, not loudly, but enough. Enough to make the old emptiness feel distant. One evening, Caleb returned from the pasture and found her sitting on the fence watching the sunset. He stopped beside her quietly. She leaned against him without hesitation. Natural now. Home now. "You ever regret answering that advertisement?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Never." Caleb studied the horizon a long moment before speaking again. "The preacher called you plain." Eleanor laughed softly under her breath. "Did he?" "Yes." "And were you disappointed?" Caleb turned toward her fully then. The fading sunlight caught her eyes, warm and steady, and no longer haunted the way they once were. "No," he said quietly. "Terrified." She laughed again, gentler this time. Then she kissed him softly beneath the evening sky. No fear, no loneliness. Only the quiet certainty of two wounded people who had finally stopped wandering. And somewhere beyond the hills, the world continued in all its harshness and noise. But here, inside the fading gold light of the ranch they built together, there was warmth, there was trust, there was peace. And for the first time in many years, Caleb Mercer no longer feared desire, because he finally understood something loneliness had hidden from him too long. Love was never the thing that ruined men. It was the absence of it.